Homeless veteran shares his last dollar with crying child, unaware the boy's father owns Fortune 500 company. The words echoed in James Sullivan's mind as he huddled beneath the overpass, his weathered fingers clutching a single-dollar bill. The sum total of humanity's generosity today. 38 years old, with eyes that had witnessed the scorched earth of Afghanistan and shoulders that carried invisible wounds of war, James had been reduced to this moment, $1 between himself and absolute emptiness. December in Chicago showed no mercy. The wind sliced through his layers of mismatched clothing, a tattered army jacket beneath a threadbare overcoat, both inadequate against winter's assault. His beard, once neatly trimmed during his days as Staff Sergeant Sullivan, now grew wild, partially concealing the scar that ran from his left cheekbone to the corner of his mouth. A souvenir from an IED that had taken 2 of his friends and left him with nightmares that medication couldn't silence. 6 years since his honorable discharge. 2 years since he'd lost his apartment after the PTSD episodes cost him his job at the warehouse. 8 months since the veterans' shelter downtown had reached capacity, forcing him onto the streets. Numbers that defined his descent. James tucked the dollar into his breast pocket, close to his heart, in the folded photograph of his late mother. Tonight, he would allow himself one luxury, a cup of hot coffee from the 24-hour diner that didn't mind his presence as long as he paid for something. The thought of wrapping his fingers around the warm ceramic mug gave him something to move toward as the afternoon light began to fade. He gathered his few possessions, a backpack containing spare socks, a toothbrush, his military ID, and the medications he couldn't always afford to refill. The weight of it felt right against his shoulders, the routine of movement offering the illusion of purpose. The 6-block walk to Maryland's diner cut through Westfield Park, a route James preferred despite the painful reminder of normalcy. Families bundled up against the cold, children laughing, couples walking hand in hand. Today the park was emptier than usual, the bitter cold keeping most people indoors. But as he approached the central plaza with its dormant fountain, a sound pierced the winter stillness, a child crying. James paused, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Near the fountain sat a small boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, dressed in an expensive-looking blue coat and matching hat, tears streaming down his reddened cheeks. The child's sobs were the unrestrained kind that came from genuine distress, not the manipulative cries James had learned to distinguish during his time on the streets. He scanned the area for an adult, but the nearest people were a pair of teenagers huddled over their phones by the park entrance, too far away and too absorbed to notice the child. James hesitated. Approaching a crying child could be misinterpreted, especially for someone who looked like him, unkempt, homeless, potentially dangerous in the eyes of worried parents. But the boy's sobs intensified, small shoulders shaking beneath the expensive coat. "You okay there, buddy?" James kept his distance, voice gentle but loud enough to be heard over the wind and the child's cries. The boy looked up, startled. His face was tear-streaked, nose running, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief at being addressed. He couldn't have been older than 7, with dark curls peeking out from his knitted hat and eyes the color of amber. I dropped it." The boy hiccuped between sobs. James took a cautious step closer. "Dropped what, bud?" "My quarter." The child pointed to the frozen fountain. "I was gonna make a wish, and it fell out of my glove, and now it's gone forever." The simplicity of the problem, a lost quarter, a missed wish, struck James with unexpected force. In his world of survival, where each day was a battle against the elements, hunger and despair, such a small loss seemed inconsequential. Yet to this child it was everything. James recognized something in the boy's distress, a purity of emotion he'd once possessed, before war and hardship had taught him to bury his feelings deep. The child hadn't yet learned that some wishes never come true, that sometimes the universe takes far more than a quarter. What were you going to wish for?" James asked, taking another step closer. The boy wiped his nose with his sleeve. "I can't tell, or it won't come true." "Even if you lost the quarter?" The child considered this, his small brow furrowing. "I wanted my dad to smile again, like he used to before Mom went to heaven." The words hit James with physical force. He knew about losing people, about the way grief hollowed you out until smiling felt like a betrayal. This child, dressed in his expensive clothes, carried a weight as real as any James had known. Without thinking, James reached into his breast pocket and pulled out the dollar bill. His entire day's earnings, his coffee money, his one small comfort. "Tell you what," he said, crouching down to the boy's level, careful to maintain enough distance not to frighten him. This is better than a quarter. It's a whole dollar. 4 wishes instead of 1. The child's eyes widened. Really? James nodded. And I've been saving it for something special. But I think your wish is more important than mine. He held out the dollar. The boy stared at it, then at James, skepticism warring with hope on his small face. My dad says I shouldn't take things from strangers. Your dad is right, James replied. That's smart, but this isn't for you to take. It's for you to throw into the fountain. I'll stay right here, and you can make your wish. The boy hesitated, then stepped forward to accept the dollar. Their fingers brushed in the exchange. The child's small, soft hand against James's calloused palm. For a moment, James felt the ghost of another touch. His mother smoothing his hair before school, his battle buddy clasping his shoulder before their final patrol, a nurse adjusting his hospital gown after the explosion. The boy clutched the dollar tightly, then looked up at James. But what about your wish? James smiled, feeling the scar tissue pull at the corner of his mouth. I'll tell you a secret about wishes, buddy. Sometimes giving one away is better than keeping it for yourself. The child considered this with the seriousness only the very young can muster for philosophical matters. Then with sudden decision, he turned to the fountain, closed his eyes tightly, and whispered something inaudible before tossing the dollar toward the frozen water. The bill fluttered awkwardly, landing on the ice-crusted surface. There, the boy said, satisfaction replacing his tears. Now Dad will smile again. I hope so, James replied, feeling a strange lightness despite knowing he would go without coffee tonight. Where is your dad anyway? Are you here alone? The boy's eyes widened again, this time with alarm. He's on a work call. He said to stay where he could see me, but then I saw a squirrel and followed it, and now I don't know where I am. James nodded, understanding dawning. You're lost. That's scarier than losing a quarter, isn't it? The child's lower lip trembled dangerously. Am I going to be lost forever? No way, James assured him, rising to his full height and wincing at the way his knee protested. An old injury that worsened in the cold. We'll find your dad. He's probably looking for you right now. What's your name, buddy? Elliot, the boy said. Elliot Caldwell. Nice to meet you, Elliot. I'm James. He intentionally left off his last name, knowing it would mean nothing to a child. Which direction did you come from? Elliot pointed vaguely toward the east side of the park. That way, I think. By the big trees. All right, let's head that way and look for your dad. What does he look like? He's tall, Elliot said, falling into step beside James, his previous fear of strangers apparently forgotten in the more immediate concern of being lost. And he wears glasses and a black coat. And he was talking on his phone. James nodded. That's helpful. Let's go find him. They walked side by side, an unlikely pair. The homeless veteran in his layers of worn clothing and the well-dressed child. James maintained a respectful distance, aware of how they might appear to others, particularly to a frantically searching father. Do you live in the park? Elliot asked suddenly, with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood. James hesitated. Not exactly. Where do you live? I move around a lot, James answered, deciding that a simplified truth was better than a lie. Like camping? Elliot's eyes brightened with interest. Something like that. My dad and I never go camping. He's always working. James glanced down at the boy, noting the way his shoulders slumped slightly with the admission. What does your dad do? He's a boss, Elliot replied. He has meetings all the time, even on Saturdays like today. Before James could respond, a shout cut through the cold air. Elliot, Elliot, a tall man in a black wool coat was jogging toward them, phone still clutched in one hand, his face a mask of terror and relief. As he drew closer, James noted the expensive watch on his wrist, the tailored cut of his coat, the leather briefcase he had apparently been carrying while searching. D.I.D. Elliot broke into a run, covering the distance between them in seconds and throwing himself into his father's arms. The man dropped to one knee, briefcase forgotten on the ground as he embraced his son. Where were you? I told you to stay where I could see you. I got lost, Elliot said into his father's shoulder. But I made a wish, and then James helped me find you. For the first time, the man looked up, noticing James. The transformation in his expression was immediate, relief hardening into suspicion as he took in James's appearance. He stood positioning himself slightly in front of Elliot, one hand firmly on his son's shoulder. Who are you? He demanded. James took a step back, hands raised slightly in a gesture of peace. Just someone who was passing by. Your boy was upset, and I offered to help him find you. The man's eyes narrowed, scanning James from head to toe, lingering on the tattered army jacket, the worn boots, the unshaven face. Dad? Elliot tugged at his father's coat. James gave me his dollar so I could wish for you to smile again. Confusion replaced suspicion on the man's face. What? I lost my quarter in the fountain, and I was crying, and James gave me his dollar for my wish. Elliot pointed back toward the fountain. It was his last one. The man, Mr. Caldwell, looked back at James, reassessing. James saw the moment when understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by embarrassment at his initial reaction. Thank you, Caldwell said stiffly, for helping my son. James nodded. He's a good kid, smart to stay in one place when he realized he was lost. An awkward silence fell between them. Two men from worlds so different they might as well have been speaking different languages. Caldwell reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. I'd like to repay you for the dollar, he said, extracting several bills. James shook his head. No need. It was a gift. Please, I insist. Caldwell held out what appeared to be a $20 bill. The offer, though likely well-intentioned, stung James's pride. The gulf between giving his last dollar freely and being handed charity as compensation felt vast. Yet the practical side of him, the part that knew tonight would be bitterly cold, that his stomach was already cramping with hunger, wanted to accept. Before he could decide, Elliot spoke up. Dad, you should smile. I wished for it, remember? Something in Caldwell's face softened as he looked down at his son. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly, and a small, almost reluctant smile appeared. You're right, buddy. I should. He turned back to James, the smile still in place. More genuine now. At least let me buy you a cup of coffee or something to eat. It's the least I can do. James hesitated. The offer of coffee, exactly what he had been planning to buy himself, seemed like a strange coincidence, a small alignment of the universe. And there was something in Caldwell's expression now that wasn't pity or discomfort, but a kind of genuine gratitude. Coffee would be good, James conceded. Thank you. There's a cafe just outside the park, Caldwell said, picking up his briefcase. Will that work? James nodded, though he knew the cafe, an upscale place where a single pastry cost more than what he sometimes made in a day of panhandling. Not somewhere he would normally be welcome. As they walked, Elliot positioned himself between the two men, occasionally looking up at James with a smile that suggested they shared a secret. In a way they did. The secret knowledge that wishes sometimes took unexpected forms. The cafe, with its warm lighting and expensive coffee, was busy but not crowded. A few heads turned as they entered, James's appearance standing in stark contrast to the well-dressed Saturday crowd. Caldwell either didn't notice the looks or chose to ignore them, steering them to a table by the window. Hot chocolate for you, Elliot, he asked, setting his briefcase down. The boy nodded enthusiastically. With extra whipped cream? Of course. Caldwell turned to James. What would you like? Just black coffee is fine, James said, feeling increasingly out of place among the tasteful decor and gentle background music. Nothing to eat? The question was casual, but James saw the way Caldwell's eyes flickered to his thin frame. He must have looked as hungry as he felt. A sandwich, maybe? James admitted. If that's all right. Caldwell nodded and went to the counter to order, leaving James and Elliot at the table. The boy immediately launched into a story about his school's upcoming holiday play, in which he had been cast as a tree. Trees don't have any lines, he explained seriously, but Dad says it's still important. Your dad's right, James replied. Every part matters. I was a shepherd in my school play when I was about your age. No lines, but I got to carry a stuffed sheep. Elliot giggled, the sound bright and unguarded. It struck James that he couldn't remember the last time he'd made someone laugh. Caldwell returned with a tray bearing 3 drinks and an assortment of food that went well beyond a single sandwich. A panini for James, a grilled cheese for Elliot, and a selection of pastries to share. I wasn't sure what you'd like, he said, distributing the items. So I got a few options. The casual generosity, treating an elaborate spread as if it were nothing, highlighted the chasm between their circumstances. But the coffee was hot, the food looked delicious, and James's hunger overrode his pride. Thank you, he said simply, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. As they ate, Caldwell asked questions. Careful ones at first, then more direct, as the initial awkwardness faded. Where was James from originally? Ohio. How long had he been in Chicago? Nearly 3 years. The conversation skated around his current situation until Elliot, with a child's directness, broke through the polite barriers. Dad, why does James live outside like camping? Caldwell's expression froze mid-bite. Elliot, that's not a polite question. It's okay, James said, deciding that honesty was simpler than evasion. I was in the army for a long time, Elliot. When I came back, some things were hard. I had trouble keeping a job, and eventually I couldn't afford a place to live. He waited for the usual responses. The awkward sympathy, the hasty change of subject, or worse, the well-meaning but uninformed suggestions about shelters and programs he'd already tried. Instead, Caldwell set down his coffee mug and asked, "Afghanistan or Iraq?" "Afghanistan," James replied, surprised. "2 tours. You serve?" Caldwell shook his head. "Number 1, but my brother did. Marines." He had a rough time when he came back, too. Something in his tone, a tightness, a careful neutrality, suggested there was more to that story. But before James could respond, Elliot piped up again. "Is your brother okay now, Dad?" A shadow crossed Caldwell's face. "We'll talk about Uncle Matt another time, buddy." The conversation shifted to safer topics. The unseasonably cold weather, Elliot's upcoming school events, neutral ground that required no vulnerability from either man. But something had changed. A small bridge extended across the divide that separated their lives. As they finished eating, Caldwell glanced at his watch. "We should get going, Elliot. We've got dinner at Grandma's tonight." James nodded, preparing to thank them and leave. The brief respite of warmth, food, and normal conversation had been unexpected and welcome, but it was time to return to his reality. Caldwell hesitated, then reached into his inner coat pocket and extracted a business card. "Listen, I don't want to presume anything, but my company is always looking for good people. If you're interested, give me a call." James accepted the card reflexively, glancing down at it. Alexander Caldwell, CEO, Westridge Technologies. The significance didn't register immediately until he noticed the familiar logo, a stylized W that appeared on billboards throughout the city and on the tech products that filled store windows. Westridge Technologies was one of the largest tech companies in the Midwest, a Fortune 500 corporation with headquarters in downtown Chicago. James looked up, reassessing the man before him. Not just a well-off father, but the head of a company worth billions. The kind of person whose world was so far removed from James's current existence that they might as well have been different species. "I don't have much tech experience," James said carefully, not wanting to seem ungrateful, but also not wanting to entertain false hopes. "We need all kinds of people," Caldwell replied. "Security, facilities management, administrative support." "What did you do in the Army?" "I was a communications specialist. Before that, I worked construction with my uncle." Caldwell nodded. "We could use someone with that background. At least think about it." James pocketed the card, knowing it would probably come to nothing but touched by the gesture nonetheless. "I will. Thank you for the coffee and food." "Can James come to our house sometime?" Elliot asked suddenly. He could see my tree costume. The question hung in the air, innocent but weighted with social complications that the child couldn't comprehend. James prepared himself for Caldwell's gentle deflection, the polite explanation of why that wouldn't be possible. But Caldwell surprised him again. "Maybe, if James wants to." He met James's eyes, and there was something there. Not pity, but something more complex. A recognition, perhaps, that the distance between their lives was not as vast as it appeared, that circumstances rather than character had placed them on opposite sides of fortune. They parted ways outside the cafe, Elliot insisting on a high five that James returned with careful gentleness. Caldwell offered a handshake, firm and businesslike, but his parting words were unexpected. "That wish Elliot made for me to smile again. It's been a tough year since we lost his mother. I haven't been very present for him." He glanced down at his son, who was attempting to catch snowflakes on his tongue. "Sometimes it takes a stranger's perspective to remind you what matters." Before James could respond, Caldwell nodded a goodbye and took Elliot's hand, leading him toward the parking lot where, presumably, an expensive car waited to carry them back to their privileged life. James stood watching them go, the business card a small weight in his pocket. Then he turned and headed back toward his usual underpass, the warm food in his stomach a temporary comfort against the gathering cold. That night, as he arranged his backpack and extra layers into a makeshift pillow beneath the concrete overpass, James found himself thinking about Alexander Caldwell and his son, about the grief that lived beneath the CEO's polished exterior, about Elliot's wish for his father to smile again. He took out the business card, studying it in the dim light filtering from a distant street lamp. Westridge Technologies, a Fortune 500 company, a world he couldn't imagine belonging to. The rational part of him said to forget it, that Caldwell's offer had been a momentary impulse born of gratitude, that nothing would come of it. Yet something, perhaps the same instinct that had prompted him to offer his last dollar to a crying child, made him tuck the card carefully back into his breast pocket next to the photograph of his mother. He would probably never call the number, but for tonight it was enough to know that it existed. A small, fragile thread connecting him to the possibility of a different life. As he drifted toward sleep, James thought he felt something shift within him. A tiny flame of something he hadn't permitted himself to feel in a long time. Hope. 3 days passed before James found himself standing outside the gleaming glass headquarters of Westridge Technologies, his reflection distorted in the polished surfaces. He had spent those days in an internal debate, alternating between dismissing Caldwell's offer as meaningless charity and allowing himself to consider that it might be genuine. In the end, necessity made the decision for him. A vicious storm had swept through Chicago the previous night, soaking his few possessions and leaving him without shelter when police cleared the underpass for emergency maintenance. With nowhere else to go and the temperature dropping dangerously, James had found a public library, used their phone to call the number on the card, and was surprised when Caldwell himself answered. The conversation had been brief, Caldwell's tone efficient but not unkind. Yes, he had meant the offer. Yes, James should come to the office. No, he didn't need to bring a resume. They would figure something out. Now, standing before the intimidating entrance, James regretted his decision. He had done his best with his appearance, using a shelter's facilities to shower and shave, wearing his cleanest clothes, trimming his beard as neatly as possible with borrowed scissors. But he still looked like what he was, a homeless veteran hoping for a miracle. Before he could retreat, the glass doors slid open and a security guard approached, not with suspicion, but with professional courtesy. "Can I help you, sir?" James swallowed. "I have an appointment with Alexander Caldwell." The guard's eyebrows rose slightly, but he consulted his tablet without comment. "Your name, sir?" "James Sullivan." A moment of scrolling, then a nod. "Yes, I see it here. If you'll follow me to the security desk, we'll get you a visitor's badge." The process was surprisingly smooth. A photo taken for a temporary ID, a brief explanation of building protocols, and then he was being escorted to an elevator that would take him to the executive floor. The guard's manner remained courteous, with no hint of the suspicion or disdain James had grown accustomed to receiving. The elevator rose swiftly, its mirrored interior offering James multiple reflections of himself. A man out of place, holding himself with the rigid posture that the military had ingrained in him, as if proper bearing could compensate for his circumstances. The executive floor was hushed, with thick carpeting that muffled footsteps and walls adorned with tasteful art. A receptionist looked up as he approached, her professional smile unwavering as she took in his appearance. "Mr. Sullivan? Mr. Caldwell is expecting you. Please have a seat and I'll let him know you're here." James sat stiffly on the edge of a sleek leather chair, feeling as though he might contaminate it somehow. Around him, employees in business attire moved with purpose, occasionally glancing curiously in his direction, but never staring outright. He had just begun to reconsider the wisdom of coming here when a familiar voice broke through his thoughts. "James, glad you could make it." Alexander Caldwell strode toward him, hand extended, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than James had earned in his last month of employment. But his greeting seemed genuine, his handshake firm and equal, as if they were colleagues rather than men from vastly different worlds. "Thank you for seeing me," James said, rising to his feet. "I appreciate the opportunity." "Of course, come on back to my office. We can talk privately there." James followed Caldwell through the open workspace, aware of curious eyes tracking their progress. The CEO's office was spacious but not ostentatious, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. A child's drawing was framed prominently on one wall, a crayon rendition of what appeared to be a tree with a smiling face. "Eliot's self-portrait from his play," Caldwell explained, noticing James's gaze. "He's very proud of it. Please have a seat." James lowered himself into a chair opposite Caldwell's desk, fighting the urge to sit at attention as he would have for a superior officer. Caldwell didn't sit behind the desk, however. Instead, he took the chair next to James, reducing the formal barrier between them. "Before we discuss potential positions," Caldwell began, "I want to be transparent about something. I looked you up after we met." James tensed. His military record was clean, honorable discharge noted, but his life since then, the sporadic employment, the evictions, the police reports from when he'd been rousted from various makeshift shelters, painted a less flattering picture. "What I found," Caldwell continued, was a staff sergeant with an exemplary service record, multiple commendations for bravery under fire, and skills that would be valuable to any organization. I also found someone who's had a difficult time since returning to civilian life. James met his gaze steadily. I have PTSD. It's managed with medication when I can afford it, but it's affected my ability to maintain employment. I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm not offering sympathy. Caldwell interrupted. I'm offering a job, but I need you to be straight with me about what you need to succeed. The directness was unexpected but refreshing. James considered his response carefully. Structure helps. Clear expectations. I do better when I understand exactly what's required of me. The uncertainty of civilian work has been challenging. Caldwell nodded. What about the PTSD specifically? What accommodations would help you manage it in a workplace setting? No potential employer had ever asked him that question. Most either avoided the topic entirely or used it as a reason not to hire him. James found himself unprepared for the question. I sometimes need a quiet space if things get overwhelming. Loud, unexpected noises can be difficult. But mostly I just need people to understand that if I seem on edge, it's not about them. That's reasonable, Caldwell said. Now let's talk about your skills and where you might fit here. For the next hour, they discussed James's military training, his previous civilian work, and various positions within Westridge Technologies that might be suitable. By the end, Caldwell had outlined a potential role in facilities management, overseeing security systems and building operations, a position that would utilize James's technical training while providing the structure he needed. The salary is competitive, Caldwell said, naming a figure that made James blink in surprise. Full benefits, including comprehensive health coverage that would include therapy and medication if you need it. We also have a veterans support group that meets weekly. It seemed too good to be true. James had been hoping for an entry-level position, something to get him back on his feet. Not a management role with benefits and a salary that could afford him a decent apartment. Why? He asked finally, the question that had been brewing since Caldwell's unexpected offer in the cafe. Why are you doing this? Caldwell was silent for a moment, his gaze shifting to the window in the city beyond. When my wife died last year, I was lost. I buried myself in work, left Elliot with nannies and my mother-in-law, convinced myself I was doing the right thing by ensuring the company's success for his future. He turned back to James, his expression reflective. That day in the park was the first time in months I'd taken him out myself. I was on a business call when he wandered off. When I couldn't find him, I felt... He broke off, swallowing hard. I felt like I was losing everything all over again. James nodded, understanding. The panic of that moment had been visible in Caldwell's face when he'd found Elliot. When he told me about your dollar, about giving up your last bit of money so he could make a wish for me, Caldwell shook his head slightly. It put things in perspective. Here was someone with every reason to hoard what little he had, choosing instead to give it away to comfort a child he didn't know. He met James's eyes directly. This isn't charity. It's recognition of character. You've got skills this company needs, and I believe you'd be an asset here. The fact that it might help you get back on your feet is a bonus, not the primary motivation. James wanted to believe him. After years of struggle, of systems failing him and opportunities disappearing, the idea that something might finally break in his favor seemed almost impossible to accept. I'd like to accept the position, he said finally, but I should warn you, I don't have a permanent address right now. No phone either. We can advance you enough for a security deposit and first month's rent. Caldwell replied smoothly. Our HR department can help you find something suitable. As for a phone, you'll need one for work anyway, so that's covered. The practicality of the response, addressing the immediate obstacles without dwelling on them, eased something in James's chest. This wasn't pity, it was problem solving. They agreed that James would start the following Monday, giving him time to secure housing and prepare for the transition. As they concluded their meeting, Caldwell accompanied him back to the elevator. One more thing, Caldwell said as they waited. Elliot keeps asking when you're coming over for dinner. He's quite taken with you. No pressure, but the invitation is open when you're ready. James didn't know how to respond to that. The idea of socializing with his new employer, of entering their home as a guest rather than an employee, crossed boundaries he wasn't sure how to navigate. Maybe someday, he said finally. Thank you. As the elevator doors closed between them, James caught a glimpse of Caldwell's expression, not disappointment, but patience. As if he understood that some distances couldn't be crossed immediately, that trust and comfort would take time to build. Descending to the lobby, James felt a sensation he barely recognized. A lightness in his chest, an easing of the constant tension he'd carried for years. Outside, the winter sun broke momentarily through the clouds, casting the city in a different light. For the first time in longer than he could remember, James Sullivan stepped onto the street not as a homeless veteran, but as a man with a future. The weeks that followed moved with dreamlike swiftness. James found a small but clean apartment within walking distance of public transportation. He received his first paycheck and bought essentials: decent work clothes, groceries, a basic phone. His new colleagues were professional and welcoming, treating him with the same respect afforded to any other employee. The work itself suited him perfectly: systematic, technical, with clear protocols and expectations. The building's complex security systems engaged his intelligence, while the structured environment provided the stability he needed. When occasional PTSD episodes occurred, he found that having access to a private office where he could regroup made them manageable rather than catastrophic. By the end of his first month, James had established a routine that felt almost normal. He took his medications regularly, attended therapy sessions covered by his insurance, and even joined the Veterans Support Group, where he found understanding from others who had walked similar paths. Alexander Caldwell maintained a professional relationship at work, treating James neither with special favor nor with condescension. Their interactions were cordial but limited to business matters. The dinner invitation wasn't mentioned again, and James wondered if it had been withdrawn, or if Caldwell was simply giving him space to adjust to his new life. Then on a Friday afternoon, as James was preparing to leave for the weekend, his phone buzzed with a text message from a number he didn't recognize. "Hi James, this is Elliot," using Dad's phone. "My tree play is tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Dad says to ask if you want to come. I have extra tickets." The message was followed by another, clearly from Caldwell. "Sorry about that. He grabbed my phone when I wasn't looking. No pressure at all, but you're welcome to join us if you like. The play is at Westside Elementary." James stared at the messages, feeling a complex mix of emotions. The invitation touched him, that Elliot had remembered him, had wanted him there for something important. But it also triggered his instinctive wariness, the sense that he didn't belong in that world of school plays and family outings. He was still deliberating his response when a third message arrived. "Elliot says to tell you that trees are very important parts. Without them, the forest would just be a field." The simple logic of it made James smile. Before he could overthink it, he typed a reply: "I'd be honored to attend. Please thank Elliot for the invitation." The next day, James found himself sitting in an elementary school auditorium, surrounded by parents clutching programs and phones ready to record. He felt conspicuously out of place until Caldwell arrived, greeting him with a casual wave and taking the seat beside him. "Thanks for coming," Caldwell said. "Elliot checked the audience 3 times during dress rehearsal to see if you were there. I had to explain what a real performance was." James nodded, strangely moved by the child's anticipation. "I'm glad he invited me. It's been a long time since I attended anything like this." The lights dimmed before Caldwell could respond, and the play began, a somewhat chaotic production about forest conservation, with children playing various woodland creatures and elements of nature. Elliot, true to his role as a tree, stood stoically at the side of the stage, his costume an elaborate construction of brown fabric and green tissue paper. When his single moment came, stepping forward with the other trees to sway in a choreographed wind dance, Elliot's face was a study in concentration. As he returned to his position, his eyes scanned the audience until he spotted James and Caldwell. The smile that broke across his face was radiant. After the performance, they waited in the school hallway as children emerged from changing out of their costumes. Elliot burst from the classroom and ran directly to James, still wearing the brown part of his costume, but with the paper leaves removed. "Did you see me?" he demanded, bouncing on his toes. "Did you see my swaying? I didn't mess up. You were the most convincing tree I've ever seen." James replied seriously. "Very majestic." Elliot beamed, then turned to his father. "Dad, can James come for pizza? You said maybe after the play we could have pizza." Caldwell looked to James with a raised eyebrow, leaving the decision to him. "You're welcome to join us if you don't have other plans." The old hesitation rose within James, the feeling of being an intruder in their family moment, the uncertainty about how to behave in a social setting after so long on the margins. But Elliot was looking up at him with such open hope that refusal seemed impossible. "Pizza sounds great," he said. "Thank you." The pizza place was casual and noisy, filled with other families from the play. Elliot dominated the conversation, analyzing his performance with the seriousness of a theater critic while demolishing a slice of pepperoni pizza. Caldwell occasionally interjected with gentle teasing or a proud comment, his affection for his son evident in every interaction. James mostly listened, comfortable in the periphery of their family dynamic. But as the meal progressed, Elliot began directing more questions his way, drawing him into their circle with the natural inclusivity of childhood. "Did you ever be in plays when you were little?" he asked, sauce decorating the corners of his mouth. "A few," James replied, "but I was usually behind the scenes. I liked building the sets more than being on stage. Like hammering and stuff." Elliot's eyes widened with interest. "Exactly. In high school, I helped build a pirate ship for Peter Pan." "That's so cool." Elliot turned to his father. "Dad, can we build stuff? Like a pirate ship?" Caldwell laughed, a warm sound that transformed his usually serious face. "Maybe something smaller to start. A birdhouse, perhaps." "I bet James knows how to build birdhouses," Elliot said with complete confidence. "Right, James?" The assumption of his capabilities, the easy inclusion in their future plans, caught James off guard. "I do, actually. My grandfather taught me when I was about your age." "See, Dad?" Elliot said triumphantly. "James can teach us." Caldwell met James's eyes over his son's head, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, of Elliot's unself-conscious adoption of James into their lives, of the strangeness and unexpected warmth of this new connection. "If James is willing, that would be great," Caldwell said carefully. "But remember, James has his own life and plans. We can't assume he wants to spend his weekends building birdhouses with us." Elliot's face fell slightly, and James found himself speaking before he'd fully formed the thought. "I'd be happy to help with a birdhouse project sometime. It's been years since I built one, but it's not something you forget." The pure joy that lit Elliot's face made any potential awkwardness worth it. The rest of the meal passed pleasantly, with conversation flowing more naturally than James had expected. By the time they parted outside the restaurant, something had shifted, the beginnings of a friendship taking root where before there had only been the connection of employer and employee. "Thank you again for coming," Caldwell said as they prepared to go their separate ways. It meant a lot to Elliot. "I enjoyed it," James replied, surprised to find it was entirely true. "He's a great kid." "He is." Caldwell's expression softened with pride and something more complex, a shadow of the grief he carried. His mother would be proud of him. The mention of Elliot's mother, the first time Caldwell had spoken of her directly to James, felt like a small door opening between them. James nodded, acknowledging both the pride and the pain. "See you Monday," he said simply. "See you then." Caldwell hesitated, then added, "And James? The birdhouse offer, Elliot won't forget. Just so you know what you're getting into." James smiled. "I'm counting on it." As he walked toward the bus stop that would take him back to his apartment, James felt a curious sense of expansion, as if his world, so long contracted to the narrow focus of survival, was slowly growing to include new possibilities. Not just work and shelter, but connection, friendship, purpose beyond the day-to-day. It had started with a single dollar offered to a crying child. Now somehow it was becoming something more, a second chance not just at stability, but at belonging. Spring arrived in Chicago with tentative warmth, transforming the city from its winter starkness to vibrant green. For James, the changing season marked 5 months since his life had upended, from homeless veteran to employed, housed, and increasingly connected to a world he had thought lost to him. The birdhouse project had indeed materialized, evolving into a weekend tradition. What began as a single simple structure had grown into an elaborate collection, Elliot's creativity demanding ever more complex designs, from multi-level bird condominiums to whimsical structures shaped like castles and spaceships. James found himself at the Caldwell home at least once a week, initially just for the birdhouse sessions, but gradually for other activities as well. Dinner, movie nights, even a basketball game in the driveway, where Elliot's determination made up for his lack of height. Alexander, no longer Mr. Caldwell or boss, but Alex, had transformed as well. The reserved, grief-shadowed CEO had gradually revealed other facets of himself. A dry sense of humor, a competitive streak at board games, a thoughtful patience with both his son's exuberance and James's occasional withdrawal when memories or anxiety surfaced. They rarely spoke directly about the circumstances of their first meeting, the dollar in the fountain, James's homelessness, the stark contrast of their positions. But it lingered as an unspoken foundation of their friendship, a reminder of how randomly lives could intersect and change course. On a particularly fine Saturday in April, They were working in Alex's backyard, putting finishing touches on Elliot's latest vision. A birdhouse designed to look like the Westridge Technologies headquarters, complete with tiny mirrored windows made from reflective paper. Do birds like tall buildings? Elliot wondered, carefully applying glue to what would become the roof. Birds actually do nest in skyscrapers sometimes, James replied, steadying the structure as Elliot worked. They adapt to human environments better than we might expect. Alex, returning from the kitchen with lemonade, caught the end of James's explanation. Much like humans adapt to unexpected circumstances, he observed, setting the tray down on the patio table. James nodded, recognizing the parallel Alex was drawing. Some better than others. Birds are smart, Elliot declared with authority, oblivious to the deeper conversation. Dad, when can we put this one up? I want to see if they move in right away. We need to let the glue dry completely, Alex said, ruffling his son's hair. Maybe tomorrow morning. Elliot accepted this with only minimal disappointment, distracted by the prospect of lemonade and the cookies that accompanied it. As he darted to the table, Alex moved closer to inspect their handiwork. It really does look like the building, he commented. You've got a talent for this, James. Elliot did most of it. James demurred. I just helped with the cutting and some of the structural elements. Still, Alex's gaze shifted from the birdhouse to James. You've been good for him. For both of us, actually. The simple acknowledgement caught James off guard. They had developed a comfortable friendship, but direct expressions of its value were rare between them. Men shaped by environments where emotional articulation wasn't encouraged. You've been good for me too, James replied after a moment. Both of you. It was a significant understatement. The Caldwells had become central to his recovery, not just through the job that had stabilized his life, but through the connections that had helped heal his isolation. But Alex seemed to understand the depth beneath the simple words, nodding in recognition. Dad! James! The lemonade's getting warm, Elliot called from the table, impatience clear in his voice. They joined him, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. Elliot's upcoming science fair, a new project at work, plans for possibly expanding their birdhouse territory to the local park if they could get permission. As the afternoon progressed into evening, they ordered pizza and moved inside, settling in the living room for what had become a weekly ritual, movie night, with Elliot selecting from an approved list and the adults pretending they weren't as invested in animated adventures as the 8-year-old. Halfway through the film, Elliot, who had been fighting sleep for the past 20 minutes, finally succumbed, his head drooping against his father's shoulder. Alex carefully adjusted him into a more comfortable position without disturbing his sleep. Should I head out? James asked quietly, beginning to rise from his seat. Let you get him to bed. Alex shook his head. Stay if you want. We can finish the movie. He sleeps like a rock once he's out. James settled back, watching as Alex gently smoothed Elliot's hair with an expression of such tender love that it felt almost intrusive to witness. The quiet moment highlighted something James had observed over the months, how Alex had transformed from the distracted, grief-burdened father he'd first met to this present, attentive parent who clearly treasured each moment with his son. When the movie ended, Alex carefully lifted Elliot and carried him upstairs to bed. James used the time to clean up their pizza boxes and glasses, a small contribution to the household that had become automatic. Alex returned to the living room, now holding 2 beers. He offered one to James and took a seat in the armchair across from him. He wanted me to remind you that tomorrow is Birdhouse Installation Day, Alex said with a smile. In case you had forgotten the sacred appointment. James accepted the beer with a nod of thanks. Nah, wouldn't miss it. I've been reading up on the best heights and locations for different bird species. Thought we might try to attract something specific with this one. Always the researcher, Alex commented, his tone approving. That's what makes you so good at the security systems work. You leave nothing to chance. It was true. James had approached his job with the same thoroughness that had served him in the military, learning the building systems inside and out, identifying vulnerabilities, implementing improvements. He'd recently been promoted to head of security operations, a position that came with increased responsibility and another salary bump that had allowed him to move to a better apartment. Speaking of work, Alex said, shifting to a more serious tone, there's something I wanted to discuss with you, a new initiative we're considering. James straightened slightly, moving mentally from friend to employee mode. What kind of initiative? A veterans hiring program. Alex leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. More structured than our current approach. Dedicated recruitment, specialized training, support services. I'd like you to help design it. The proposal took James by surprise. Me? I don't have any HR experience. But you have life experience that's directly relevant, Alex countered. You know what works and what doesn't. What veterans need to successfully transition to civilian employment. Your perspective would be invaluable. James considered this, turning the beer bottle slowly in his hands. It's a good idea. There are a lot of qualified veterans out there who just need a real chance. Exactly. Alex's expression was earnest now, animated by the concept. We could make a significant difference. Set an example for other companies. Would I be leaving my current position? James asked, uncertainty creeping in. He had just mastered his role, found his footing. No, this would be an additional responsibility, with compensation adjustment, of course. You'd collaborate with HR on program development while maintaining your security operations role. Alex paused, studying James's reaction. Too much? James shook his head slowly. Not too much. Just unexpected. I'm honored you'd consider me for something like this. There's no one better qualified. Alex's conviction was clear. Think about it. No rush to decide. I will, James promised, already knowing his answer would be yes. The opportunity to help others who had walked his path, to potentially spare them some of the hardships he had endured, resonated deeply. They lapsed into comfortable silence, each lost in thought. Through the living room window, James could see the yard where their collection of birdhouses stood. Physical markers of the months of friendship, of rebuilding, of creating something new and purposeful. I never thanked you properly, Alex said suddenly, breaking the quiet. James looked up confused. For what? For that $1. For what you did for Elliot that day. Alex's voice had softened, gained a depth of emotion usually kept carefully controlled. You had every reason to ignore a crying child in the park, to save what little you had for yourself. But you didn't. James felt a flush of embarrassment, uncomfortable with gratitude for what had seemed such a simple action. Anyone would have helped. No? Alex shook his head firmly. Not anyone. Not everyone. It was a choice you made, to be kind when kindness cost you everything you had at that moment. James didn't know how to respond. The memory of that day, the bitter cold, the child's tears, the simple wish, seemed simultaneously distant and immediate, belonging to another life yet directly connected to this present moment. Elliot's wish came true, you know, Alex continued, his gaze fixed somewhere middle distance. He wished for me to smile again. And I do now, regularly. Because of him. Because of you. Because of this unexpected friendship that started with $1 in a fountain. The rawness of Alex's gratitude touched something deep in James. A place where his own healing had been quietly progressing. Where the scars of war and struggle were gradually being overlaid with new experiences, new connections. I'm the lucky one, James said finally. That day, I was at the end of my rope. $1 left, nowhere to go. If I hadn't met you and Elliot, he let the sentence hang, unwilling to voice the darker possibilities that might have awaited him. Alex nodded, understanding the unspoken. Life turns on small moments, doesn't it? Small choices. It does, James agreed, thinking of all the small choices that had led him here. Offering his $1, accepting the coffee, calling the number on the business card, saying yes to a school play invitation. Each one a step away from isolation, from despair. Each one a move toward connection, toward purpose. They talked late into the evening about the Veterans Program, about Elliot's progress in school, about a dozen ordinary topics that carried the extraordinary weight of normality, the gift of regular life that James had once thought permanently beyond his reach. When he finally left, walking to his car parked on the quiet suburban street, James paused to look back at the house. Warm light spilling from windows, birdhouses visible as silhouettes against the night sky. A place where he was welcome, where he belonged in some small but significant way. The contrast to where he had been a year ago, huddled beneath an overpass, alone with his ghosts, was so stark it almost seemed like someone else's life, someone else's story. Yet the connection between then and now was clear, a line drawn by chance, kindness, and choice. James Sullivan drove home to his apartment, to a bed with clean sheets, to a job he would return to on Monday, to plans for tomorrow's birdhouse installation, to a life rebuilt from a single $1 given freely, and all that had followed from that one small act of kindness. 1 year to the day after their first meeting, James stood with Alex and Elliot at the fountain in Westfield Park. The water flowed freely now, the ice of winter long melted into memory. Around them, the park bustled with weekend activity, families enjoying the summer warmth, children playing, couples strolling hand in hand. It had been Elliot's idea to come here today to commemorate what he solemnly called the Dollar Wish Anniversary. At 9 years old, he had developed a strong sense of the significance of rituals and remembrances, insisting that this day warranted special recognition. "This is exactly where it happened," Elliot declared, pointing to a spot by the fountain's edge. "I was crying right here, and then James came and gave me his dollar." Alex smiled at his son's precise memory. "And what a dollar that turned out to be." James nodded, looking around at the park that had once been merely a path to somewhere warmer, now transformed in his mind to a place of pivotal significance. So much had changed in a year, not just his external circumstances, but his internal landscape as well. The veterans hiring program he had helped design was now fully operational, with 15 former service members employed across various departments at Westridge Technologies. His own role had expanded further, with responsibilities that challenged his abilities, but never overwhelmed his capacity. The nightmares that had once plagued him nightly now came only occasionally, manageable interruptions rather than devastating disruptions. And then there were the Caldwells, no longer employer and child but family in all but name. Weekly dinners, shared holidays, calls and texts, and impromptu visits that had woven their lives together in ways none of them could have anticipated that cold December day. "I have something for both of you," Alex said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew 2 small boxes, handing one to James and one to Elliot. "Presents," Elliot exclaimed, immediately tearing into the wrapping. James opened his more carefully, lifting the lid to reveal a silver dollar coin, gleaming in the sunlight. Engraved on a small plaque attached to the display case were the words, "Some wishes change everything." Elliot's box contained an identical coin and inscription. He examined it with reverent fingers, then looked up at his father with wide eyes. "Is this the dollar? The one James gave me?" Alex shook his head, smiling. "No, that dollar is long gone. But these are special commemorative coins to remember that day and what came from it." James ran his thumb over the smooth metal surface, feeling the weight of it, so much more substantial than the crumpled bill he had offered a year ago, yet somehow a perfect representation of its value. "Thank you," he said simply, knowing Alex would understand the depth behind the words. "We should make wishes," Elliot declared, already poised to toss his coin into the fountain. "Are you sure you want to throw it in?" Alex asked. "It's meant to be a keepsake." Elliot considered this with serious deliberation, then nodded firmly. "Yes, because the wishes are the important part. That's what James taught me." He looked to James for confirmation, and James found himself nodding in agreement. "The wishes are what matter," he concurred. Alex conceded with a smile. "All right then, wishes it is." Elliot went first, closing his eyes tightly, lips moving in silent formulation before he tossed the coin with exaggerated ceremony. It arced through the air and landed with a small splash at the center of the fountain. "Your turn, Dad," Elliot prompted. Alex hadn't received a coin, but he pulled a quarter from his pocket, closed his eyes briefly, and sent it following his son's path into the water. Then all eyes turned to James. He held the commemorative coin in his palm, feeling its weight, its significance. A part of him wanted to keep it, this tangible symbol of the journey he had taken. But Elliot was right. The wishes were what mattered. The hope they represented, the possibilities they opened. James closed his eyes, formulating not so much a wish as a promise. To himself, to the Caldwells, to whatever twists of fate had brought them together. A promise to keep moving forward, to help others find their way as he had been helped, to never forget the power of small kindnesses. Then he released the coin, watching as it spun through the air and disappeared beneath the water's surface with barely a ripple. Elliot, who had been watching with intense concentration, broke into a wide grin. "Now all our wishes are together in the fountain." "They are," James agreed, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. "Ice cream?" Alex suggested, checking his watch. "We've got time before dinner reservations." As they walked away from the fountain, Elliot between them chattering about ice cream flavors and wish mechanics, James glanced back once more at the water sparkling in the sunlight. Somewhere beneath that surface lay 3 wishes: a child's hope, a father's gratitude, a veteran's promise. $1 freely given when it was all he had to offer had somehow multiplied beyond calculation into friendship, purpose, belonging, into a second chance at life, at connection, at joy. Not all wishes came true. James knew that better than most, but sometimes against all odds they did, transforming not just one life, but many in ways no one could have imagined. Some wishes changed everything.